Hello everyone, this is Marcel, your favorite Python on the web. So for today I want to discuss the importance of memory, the way that it affects our decisions, how we live our lives, and why it is so crucial to understand the way that memory distorts over time, not simply that it distorts. Finally, I'll tie that into relationships and MGTOW and how it all plays together. I think as far as bodily functions goes, memory is one of those things that's really underappreciated. How often does transferring files on a computer, perhaps saving some old photos, lead to massive amounts of damage to the files? To consider that the human mind is capable of recording 24/7 to the sum of nearly 100 years worth of data is actually quite remarkable. And to those who are going to argue the 8 hours of sleeping or time off, I actually remember most of my dreams. It is entirely possible if you look into lucid dreaming. A topic for another day. It would be fair to say that most of the memories, if not all the memories, that are generated during a lifetime are either inaccessible, not considered or remembered unless they are applicable to the situation, or are merely tailored to give direction on how one should behave during everyday life. For example, I'm sure you remember that 5 plus 5 is 10. The memory is there, yet it's not remembered in the sense of how that information was gathered, simply the outcome itself. I know I don't remember the day that a teacher taught me that. Well, without getting too deep into psychology or biology, recognize that memories are prioritized by a system that's controlled chemically in the brain. Picture that your mind, or at least your memory, on an average day is in idle mode. I'm sure that you can remember all the activities you did for yesterday, for example, without any difficulties. Though if you're like the average person, those memories probably come through sequences of events, not through the entire day as one solid streaming chunk. Am I right? Something changing in the situation surrounding an organism almost switches on the record button in the mind. We may not remember driving the 14 hours on a long trip, but we do remember the pit stop, or when that cop pulled us over. I've had experiences where I've driven a route for so many trips that after years it became an autopilot full through. I don't remember the stop signs, the speed limits, any of it. It all just comes naturally. So the mind becomes programmed after a period of time to recognize importance in some things and not in others. It actually prioritizes relevance because storing memories consumes energy. It burns calories. Remembering something in great detail can actually be exhausting. Anyone that's ever studied for a math test can attend to that. The first time I ever drove was in a stick shift, and it was somewhere between uncomfortable and terrifying. Nowadays, of course, I remember that fear, but I interpret it differently because of my current experiences. But I can still remember the feeling, the experience. So what causes our memories to change over time, and why is this relevant? Let's do a silly analogy here. Picture that memories are pancakes, and every time we get a new one, we stack it on the pile. You see the surface of every new pancake clearly on the top, but as it gets pushed further down below, the toppings, the jellies in between them, the butter and stuff, get smushed down with every new pancake, and you have to press harder and harder for them all to fit on the plate. Eventually, each layer gets spread so thin that it loses any sense of texture. It basically becomes a line. In a way, it's trading quality of depth, resolution, if you will, the details, in exchange for quantity. In regards to relationships, the mind works in exactly the same way. A person will remember positive or extremely negative experiences with better depth and clarity than they will the mundane daily tasks, the repetitive components. How a mind defines what is repetitive and what is crucial depends mostly on the state of the person experiencing it. It's a relative component of the way memory works. So a person, for example, will remember going skydiving, but won't remember the 6 hours of complaining that their partner did on the way there, on how their plane was so cold or they couldn't find their selfie stick. They'll remember how nice it was walking at the park with their new girlfriend and forget the fact that they were in a car with their kids screaming the whole way. Not assuming anything here, but I'm sure everyone listening can remember their first girlfriend, let's say the first serious one. But how many of you actually remember paying her bills? Like I said, not assuming that any of you did. I find it very interesting that the experience of paying an ex-girlfriend's bills occurred far more often than pleasant or novel experiences did and yet the memories of those novel experiences are quite stronger and in better detail. And yet the relationship by volume was far more the first one than the second. Novelty is one of the things that hits that record button. So when we look back at past experiences, specifically ones in relationships in regards to what we're talking about here, it's easy to forget the greater sum of what the relationship was simply because of the way that memory works. Moving on, has anyone ever heard of the good old days or the golden days phenomenon? If I'm saying it right, it's a concept of why memories of previous times always seem better than they do currently. It's kind of a concept of the grass was always greener in the past. There's a reason why that happens. See, emotions are recorded along with everything else that we learn during our lifetime, at least to varying degrees, which makes sense because emotion helps to trigger when our brain should start recording in the first place. Extreme euphoric happiness or emotional or physical pain creates deeper and more complex memories based upon the components of the brain that are switched on. If you've ever gone somewhere that you used to frequently visit with an ex and have a great welling of happiness or sadness, as the case may be, you'll understand that these associating emotions can be quite powerful. The reason why past experiences feel more positive has to do with a few factors. Realize that the way memories are sorted is an evolutionary trait. Memory of pain or bad experiences is designed to keep us alive. It's a survival tactic, so we don't repeat things that caused us harm or ultimately led to the possibility of death, not to get too deep into Darwin theory here. So most subtly, in our modern society, it is less likely for someone to die from emotional or even physical pain than it used to be in the past. So having a strong, detailed memory of bad experiences doesn't pay off as much, and it does require resources. Furthermore, remembering something difficult or unpleasant causes emotional pain, at least to a degree, and the body is not chemically rewarded for doing so. Remembering a extremely positive, pleasant experience reactivates at least partially the pleasure chemicals that were originally experienced, so you could say there's a incentive to remembering something positive. For something negative, you could almost boil it down to survival, which, as we discussed, is less relevant these days. That's at least part of the reason why, looking back on the past, things seem better than what they actually were. So, I'm sorry, gentlemen, the music of the 80s, 90s, or 2000s was not better than the music of today. There was always more shitty music than good music, you just remember the best albums better. By volume, most of it was always shit. But hey, who could blame you? Who wants to remember the bad artists? To be fair, the music of the last 5 years has been particularly garbage though. Finally, you have exterior influences that can affect the way memories are stored. Anybody that's had a long night of binge drinking can count for that one. One thing that people don't usually stop to consider is how emotions from hormones affect the way that memories are interpreted. I spoke about this in a previous video. I want to say that it was the blue pill addiction, where women giving birth to children don't remember the pain of the experience because of the emotional cocktail that's being created in their brain. Memories are heavily influenced by hormones, and people generally don't take that into account. Couple that with the fact that the strongest hormones are generally experienced during copulation, romance, that sort of thing, and that can sometimes be a hard press on that record button. It's easy to see why memories of exes and relationships can be very distorted, very positive bias, if you want to call it that. This is why they say never get back together with an ex, because you always want to remember the happy, positive stuff, but you never remember the shit and the pain that you went through the whole time you were with them. Not to mention all the other reasons why it's a bad idea. So, as something of a summary, when we look back at our past experiences and we make decisions based upon where we want to go in our future, it's important to recognize when our memories are falsified, or at least askew from what the actual experience was. If you're the type of person that has a hard time doing this, I would almost recommend keeping a journal. Taking 30 seconds a day to write down your experiences could help break through the emotional falsification of the memories. If you haven't caught what I'm getting at here, if a person were for some reason to be looking back at the past thinking, maybe I should go get a girlfriend, it wasn't that bad, and they were able to pull out a journal and look at all the page after page after page of this is bullshit, I'm gonna break up with her, I hate it, I can't stand her, it may serve as some clarity as to why that's actually a bad idea. Would it be a fair assumption to say that for everyone who's had an ex and a breakup, that relationship was a bad relationship to some degree? That it was a bad experience? After all, it ended. There's a reason why it ended. It's also fair to assert that every future relationship is likely to have the same negative attributes as any previous ones. Those negative experiences are likely to be put into the non-record section of the brain because we are tailored to forget them. They're unpleasant, they don't produce any novelty within our lives, so we don't reflect on them in the same way. So the process repeats over and over until we are willing to make a significant change, which is honestly the day we decide to stop repeating the cycle, meaning the cycle of romance, rinse, repeat. That, gentlemen, is the day we decide to go our own way. As always, this has been Marcel.